So welcome to Arts. This session we are having is the 8th panel discussion in the Forced Migration in the Arts series, where we bring together artists, people with lived experience of forced migration, activists and academics for conversation looking at forced migration in the arts. For tonight, we have got two speakers. We've got Dr. Bill Aitchison, who is an associate professor in the School of Culture and Creativity at United International College, Hong Kong Baptist University, or Beijing Normal University. Bill has over 20 years experience as an interdisciplinary artist and has created work for galleries, theaters, and festivals around the world. He writes about the arts and creates, co-authors and edits performance texts and academic texts and journalism. He is curator of the Chinese performance platform Last Minute Live Art. And also taking part in this evening's conversation is Caroline Coombs, Chief Executive Officer of Reunite Families UK, a lived experience-led not-for-profit organization that is supporting families affected by the UK's spouse visa rules. I don't know, Bill and Caroline, where do we start?
It might be good to start with the issue itself, or more information about the project in terms of how Bill and I are linked by this conversation would be good, maybe.
Okay, let's do that. Maybe. Okay, what sense do you have of what's happening with the UK's minimum income requirements or the visa rules, and what effect have they had either on you or on the families that you support in your case, Caroline?
So, I mean, I guess, first of all, it's how much people know about the minimum income requirement and what it actually means. And just in case, does everybody here know about the minimum income requirement? Okay.
I think you can refresh.
I think we do, but perhaps the people who will be watching the video later are not as aware of this issue as we are.
Okay, perfect. So in 2012, the Conservative government decided to bring in new rules for British and settled citizens who wanted to bring their partner or their family to live here in the UK. Previous to that, it was more lenient and there wasn't any particular issue. It wasn't that it wasn't working, it just seemed to coincide with the hostile environment. And families were then also brought in as a way to reduce net migration. And what that meant was suddenly families, couples and families then had to meet a minimum income requirement, which had to be earned by the British sponsor initially, and they'd have to earn £18,600. And at the time, that was a lot of money compared to what the minimum wage was. And so all of a sudden, families who were sort of couples expecting to be able to reunite here suddenly had this extremely complex, what turned out to be a very complex set of rules with this income requirement that suddenly blocked them from being able to be here. And it was targeted at British and settled citizens with partners who are from non-EU countries. And it was brought in based on financial, economic reasons, and ensuring that that people wouldn't be a burden to the taxpayer, which is one that 11 years on they still wheel out. And actually, in reality, anyone coming into the UK that isn't a resident or have indefinite leave can't access public funds anyway. So all of a sudden, families are faced with and couples are faced with these requirements. In reality, what that meant was the British person would have to return to the UK, leave the family behind, or the partner behind, and come to the UK, somehow get a job that would pay that amount of money and be secure for an absolute minimum of 6 months, until they could actually then put in the application. They're not allowed to put in the application before the 6 months. And if their salary went below that at any point in those 6 months, it would null and void that application. They'd have to start again. And in that time, depending on how far away the country was, it's quite difficult to visit, and visit visas over the time became more difficult to get. They'd be refused because the government, the Home Office, would assume that they would want to stay, and that they would then find it difficult to get them to leave. And so you're in this situation. You're the British sponsor. None of what your partner earns matters. None of that is taken into account. And you have to meet this huge list of documentation of your accommodation, English language tests, everything that actually translates also to a lot of money and a lot of expense that you have to go through. The English tests you pay for, the TB tests you pay for, uploading stuff on the biometrics, and not least the actual visa applications themselves, the visa fees themselves, plus you have to pay a health surcharge. So all of a sudden as well, you've got this huge amount of money that you've got to find as a British sponsor and your partner. And you would be hoping to be on a 5-year route, but you might not, you might get on a 10-year route. So if you don't meet the minimum income requirement, usually it's tough. You can't be here. In 2015, had a Supreme Court ruling where the Supreme Court found the minimum income requirement lawful, but any applications involving children, not lawful. And so there was some hope there, probably far too optimistic hope, I guess, on our point, but that there would be a response that at least families with children might see some change. Unfortunately, what was wheeled out months later and very quietly was an exceptional circumstances response from the Home Office, which to this day we don't know what class is exceptional circumstances. Children being separated from a parent for months and sometimes years isn't exceptional circumstances as far as the Home Office is concerned. So families are forced apart, couples are forced apart. The impacts are long-reaching. There's lots of them. I know, having the rug pulled from beneath your family unit, and your loved one, whether you're a couple or a family, is massive, and it causes huge uncertainty. The mental health impact is huge. The anxiety, the worry, the control, this omnipresent Home Office that is in control of your family life and who will decide whether you can have a life here in the UK, is extremely damaging. Some are forced into exile because they're forced to exile themselves from the country because it's just too much. They can't, they want to be together as a family, so they're forced out of the UK. And some have to get a third country because the partner's country might not be suitable. It could be dangerous. There could be issues relating sexuality, whatever it may be. That might not be the place for them to go. So then there's a third country. It's the support network that we've created, a safe space, we're very proud of. It's a place where people can come and feel safe to share their experiences, to get peer support, to not feel alone, because it's not the first thing you find out with you when you fall in love with somebody, is it? Oh, hang on a second, I've got to check visa statuses. You know, it's love, it's family, it's all the things that it's a human experience, and a human emotion, all those things. So to suddenly have the Home Office come in and drop a bomb in that is horrendous. But there's lots to say on the issue, and I don't want to, I know I've sort of spoken for some time now, and I don't want to sort of commandeer this space when other questions come up that I can answer and things. So thank you.
Or maybe before we go to Bill, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Reunite Families UK.
So we started in, so Jane and I, who co-founded it, we both met because my normal day job is television. So I'm very used to media. I'm very used to being outspoken and knowing it's there to be used and things like that. And so I was always quite outspoken, speaking to news outlets, be it press, be it TV. And I reached out to the news team, and they organised a piece to do, and so they wanted somebody else to also be on it, so it wasn't just me. And I met Jane, she was the other person, and we had this sort of moment of absolute, we're not the only people, there are so many people who will be experiencing this. Should we start a Facebook group? Okay, yeah. And so we started Reunite Families as a Facebook group in 2017, and it's grown and it's become more known for being specifically about supporting families who are going and couples who are going through this process, and offering a safe space online. So we're not as yet a physical space, but we're a go-to. We have a community online. We're now funded and now a CIC. We became an official CIC last January, which is amazing. And we've got funding from Paul Hamlin Foundation and Justice Together. And we're just doing a mental health project, which Tamsin, who's also on the call, is project managing, which we're really proud of, because we want to build the evidence of the impact of what this is doing to children and the families as well, but children mainly, and also expanding our networks, so how we can support families who are going through this process, and not, you know, obviously lobbying, and we want that change, we want the minimum income requirement gone, but also people are going through this process, or they're not even in it yet because they don't have that minimum income requirement. And so we exist to be a space and a support and doing referrals. We have a law firm that we work with who do pro bono cases for us. Today, we've just had incredible news. We've just had a really awful refusal overturned because of our intervention with the Home Office. And we lobby MPs. We basically throw anything we can at it. We're lived experience. We originated as a lived experience. We have a fantastic team who also come from a background in migration and or have personal experience of the migration system. And it's that passion to sort of keep going, and because it's a really horrible sector to be working in. On one side, you're helping people, and that's feels very wonderful, and that you are there to be able to help people, but you're up against Goliath and it all the time, and it's exhausting for a lot of people. But we do it because we have to, because there's organisations like ours need to be helping people speak out for themselves. So yes.
And how many families have you supported, and how many children are involved?
So it's hard to say. So in terms of generally, our membership for the Facebook community is over 2,500. But we also will support people outside of that community as well. With our mental health research project we're doing, that's still relatively early stages. That's a 3-year project. We've started doing focus groups, and we're sort of starting to pull together information coming through that, and then expanding out we'll be putting together a questionnaire to expand out to wider groups. And the one thing we always struggle with, I guess, is we haven't wanted to we've got a website that is building and developing and getting more of a sort of hub and a website, and we'll have a forum on there at some point. But ever since we've started, we've been kind of stuck with the algorithms of Facebook and how people can be notified of what we're doing. So we have a newsletter now that we send out on the group, but we often have some very vocal and dedicated members who then sort of become volunteers. And really, for us, that's really important, so that people who are lived experience are feeling empowered by taking action. So we have to keep checking in with ourselves as well to make sure that is happening, because it's the power of those who are affected that is the most powerful. And there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of different skill sets within our membership. And it's nice to sometimes see them using those skills to do something towards the issue. But most people, the reality is most people are like so anxious, so rabbit in headlights, that it feels like an argument they'll never win. So what's the point? The apathy, the worry, the distress can sometimes create a huge amount of inaction. So when we do get people who want to speak up and put their head above the parapet, it's an incredible thing.
And how about you, Bill? What's your interest in the topic?
Okay, so my interest is that I'm an artist who's been exiled as a result of this minimum income requirement. So listening to Caroline, I never knew about this group, so it's really nice to hear about. I'll totally join you after we finish this session, because my experience of the minimum income requirement has been that it has exiled me. And whenever I mention this to anyone, they think I'm somehow weird, and that because I have a kind of history of doing weird things, I'm an artist, so they think it's just another part of my weird story, rather than a systemic issue which affects a significant number of people who are not in any way weird. They're distressed, and families are separated as a result of it. So my sense is this is something which is far more widespread, and it's somehow an issue which the UK is in denial about, one way or another. And I sometimes ask myself, why is it that people are somehow not paying attention to this? I can only guess that it's one of these issues which has never become particularly politicized, in the sense that it's caused outrage on some kind of wider level, and so it's always remained as something which is somehow a personal story. I hope we can get onto that political level, because it is a kind of Tory policy, essentially. But if I think about it from my own experience of it, and go through that way, I knew nothing of it. I was working as a professional artist for many years, and mostly in performance, in theatre, live art, this type of area, and earning my living and kind of working a lot in Europe, a bit in America, and here and there. And I started getting work in China. And that's where I met my future wife, and she came to the UK and studied, but of course the study visas were also kind of finding a way to kind of reduce the time. And so she was basically pushed back to China. And it didn't seem that there was any easy way to kind of get her to stay. So I was kind of, easy about it and moved to China. And it was only when we then got married a couple of years later that I realized that if we wanted to return to the UK, there was now this regulation, which I knew nothing of, which would mean that I would have to be earning over £18,600 per annum. And as a freelance artist, I was not making that. As a freelance artist, you're always trying to reduce your expenses, and to be honest, you're kind of having to kind of work somewhat on the edge. But I was always kind of making it okay, but not to that level. And so also, I think this is a type of policy which affects freelancers worse, because you have to kind of prove your income through all these kind of things. If you're kind of working for a stable employer, I would guess that it would be easier to kind of pass through those hoops. But in my case, I was basically in a rather hopeless kind of situation where there was no obvious way for me to return with my wife and now our son to the UK. And so Tories somehow finally found a way to kind of push me out, to kick me out of the country. I laugh at it, because if I don't laugh, I would just get annoyed at it. But I've not been a fan of them for a long time. And it was when I sort of discovered this, then I read around it. I also sort of discovered that it was a thing of Theresa May's, I believe, when she was Home Secretary. And that it was originally justified as a way to prevent sham marriages, which they said were endemic within the South Asian community. It was nothing of the sort. It was just a way to cut down numbers. And it's a kind of very blunt tool to kind of make it more difficult for people to enter the UK. And it's a type of policy which I guess affects kind of disproportionately people from working class backgrounds, which is my background, from Scottish working class background, not that you would guess it from my accent. And so I don't have money behind me, which is another way which people can sometimes get through. So it sends the very clear message to working class people now that you should not look for a partner who is from another country. Stick to people who are within the country. But it's a different kind of rule for people who are from wealthier backgrounds. So I find this kind of particularly obnoxious because it's kind of class-based in this way, and it mixes class with race in another way. So I have one way or another been pushed out of the UK. And it's kind of interesting because China turned out to be a far more welcoming country than the UK, finally, for the two of us, or now the three of us. So there were none of these ridiculous restrictions in China about you needing to kind of earn an income to sponsor your couple. It's and so I managed to kind of make a life here, and I do have to find jobs and things, but we're resourceful, and so in some ways it's turned into a kind of my focus or my emphasis has moved away from the UK and away from this issue in some way, and my focus is more on how to make a life for myself here in China. It's quite possible that I will never live in the UK again, and our family will never live in the UK. there are maybe one or two things which could happen, which could change that, most notably this policy being dropped. But I'm not expecting that to happen anytime soon. I don't think it's very wise to kind of pin your hopes on that. And so instead, it's kind of led to a general disenchantment with the UK and looking towards other countries as being potentially better places to live and work in.
And this is a question for both of you. Why do you think there's this fixation on numbers, on treating people who were born elsewhere, but who've got connections with the UK, on treating them as numbers? Why do you think this is happening?
Well, it's easy to treat people as numbers rather than the human beings that they are. It feeds into decades of fear-mongering around immigrants. And it's a way to be able to blame others. So deflecting, it's all distraction. Sham marriages, from what I understand, there was never any evidence that sham marriages was a thing. Like Bill said, it was an excuse and another lame reason that they could say this is what we're doing to bring down net migration, because it's one way, and especially post-Brexit, it's one way. Numbers become a bigger issue when you've got a small island like Britain that has limitations to it because it's a very small island. There's only so much that we can do. And so it then becomes a real them and us, a pitting people one against the other. And it's a narrative that's very powerful and has been used for a really long time to shift blame and shift focus. And putting numbers on, they've been doing it this year with the net migration figures. And then all these horrifying reactions to the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people coming over. And when you actually start dissecting that, and then it becomes the students of the issue, it's really small-minded, but also it's something that they know is a powerful weapon in the Tory armoury. It's a last-ditch attempt, especially now, to win votes. Brexit was very much sort of based on controlling borders and our country back in this really horrible narrative. And yeah, I think that's not quite sure what I'll say, but yeah.
How about you, Bill?
Well, it's funny to be considered as a number, but I guess I am just another statistic, finally. I think that, and I'm a bit far away. It's been quite a number of years since I've lived in the UK now, so I'm not entirely sure. Although I did sort of, I was reading around the issue again recently. I noticed Suella Braverman is pledging to raise the limit further so that it will catch more people. But it also strikes me as somewhat ironic that they're now discovering, it seems that there's a shortage of workers. and that this kind of keeping people out isn't necessarily always useful, and that there's a shortage of people who can do certain jobs, and that maybe migration is useful after all. And which is kind of ironic, but I think within the Tories themselves, there's a kind of division between those who are just sort of plain racist and those who have a more economic kind of view and see things in a more clear way, not necessarily a kind of sympathetic, humane way, but a more kind of clear business logic. And the business logic is that this doesn't make sense. And there's another sort of level there where having kind of people who have a partner in the UK is kind of interesting, because there's this sort of sense of people moving to the UK from other cultures don't understand us, and they get so upset about, diversity. And surely if people are married to somebody from the UK, then this is the kind of perfect situation in which people will be integrated into the society and have a ready network. So it seems absolutely absurd to kind of, these are the people who are the most quick and the most ready to kind of form relationships within the country. So it seems particularly absurd to be trying to attack these people. But that's what they do, because it's all a way to reduce numbers, which they're kind of number proud in that way. And in terms of this kind of ridiculousness of the whole thing, Brexit was sort of premised on this idea of taking back control and doing business with the whole world. And my wife is actually an incredibly kind of high-level translator of English and Chinese, really kind of uncommonly gifted translator. Just the sort of person you would want in the country if you are going to be trying to promote business, cultural exchange, and this type of thing between the UK and China, which is in some ways the kind of the largest sort of economic or rising economic power. But no, it's far more desirable to keep people out in this way. So because there's just the numbers, and so there's no kind of sense of looking things even in a logical way. So it seems to me the whole kind of policy is driven by a kind of blind ideology rather than any sense of pragmatism. So once you understand it in that way, that it's basic kind of some sort of racist ideological level, that you can't actually argue with these people. The argument is not on that level of some kind of sensible argument. You can and you should make it. Maybe some people will take that, but it's on a much deeper level of the value of people from other countries and what they bring to the country is really the issue here.
And to add to that as well, we European families, European British families, are now having to follow the minimum income requirement rules. So all of a sudden, there are all of the expats, Brit expats living across Europe, who may at one point have thought, yeah, we'll go back to Britain. It was always a door that was forever open, right? No more. And now they have to go through this process. So the numbers of impacted couples and families will rise massively. And it has only been, a slow burn to the realization that this is now a route that they have to take, because there was the pre-settled status, there was all that sort of withdrawal, that time that we had. That door's closing, and now it's the minimum income requirement that they will be privy to. And it's a shocker. All of a sudden, the lives and the futures that they always thought would be there for them is taken away. It's, that is a massive rug to pull out from underneath them. And for what most people do not know this is even an issue, because anybody you speak to, even my friend the other day, who's known I've been doing this for years, he's like, but you're a family, you've got you've got a child together. What on earth? People, because normal society would think that it's the most normal thing to do, to be able, that you can be here with a loved one or as a family, and they can't comprehend that there would be this block, because it's just, none of it makes sense, and it's so against human rights, yet they are getting away with it. The Article 8 human rights is not worth the paper it's written on in this space, because they literally just bulldoze through it with families, and that I can never understand, how they manage to get away with it. And a lot of it because there isn't, like Bill's mentioned earlier, it's not up there as a recognised topic, and we do what we can as a very small organisation to try and raise awareness. But there's a hell of a lot of shouting to do, and it's a big vacuum, it's a big void. It feels like, but that's a big part that we're up against, is that people don't actually know that families are being separated this way, and that to be a family, a cross-border family in this country, is fraught with all of these issues.
What do you think should be done? What do you think needs to be done about the issues?
There needs to be more awareness that this is an issue, first and foremost. How that happens on a big enough scale to make a dent is another issue. Getting that, I mean, I've pitched to the TV channels, a couple of times over the years, bringing this to the space. I've even done a taster tape with a TV company, didn't quite get past the line because it's immigration and it's a very difficult subject for a TV channel to deal with, but at least it could potentially hit a lot of people in a short space of time. And then you've got your newspapers, your Guardians, your Independents of this world that do speak frequently about it. They're always sidelined as the woke and, and all these liberal lefties, which I find, it's grating that people who consider human compassion and what would be deemed right as being woke or being liberal lefty. It's like, no, it's just being a human being, right? But that it's all politicized so strongly. And it's, I mean, we tried different tactics with Reunite, with press, with raising awareness of the stories, doing Twitter campaigns, taking over a footballer's Twitter, for example, and just sort of letting more people know, doing collaborations, lobbying MPs, doing calls for evidence, speaking out wherever and however we can. This mental health project that we're doing, wanted to do it for years, and we're now doing it. And my hope is that through showing what it's doing to children, it will resonate, and it will be, what, we are doing this to children, government is doing this to children. But it's just hard to know. Like Windrush was something that was going on for a period of time underneath. There's a lot of people obviously in the sector that knew what was going on, but they couldn't quite, there was, getting that big kind of shock, reaction to what actually had been going on and what was going on. There was a culmination of things coming together that finally brought it to the attention that was needed, and and the rest as we know. But getting traction with something like this seems to be difficult, as Bill's spoken about as well. I don't know what the golden ticket is for it, but we're trying. We certainly try to do what we can to highlight. And obviously, we're here. We're having this conversation, which is amazing.
How about you, Bill? What do you think needs to be done?
Well, there's what needs to be done in the UK on the kind of the level, and maybe that's where Caroline's focused. And then there's what's to be done from my personal point of view in terms of a response. In terms of the UK, it was actually part of the manifesto commitment under Corbyn to repeal this legislation, but of course they never got into power. But like Caroline said, Labour is now being cagey, and we do not know. But so I guess in some senses, this is the time to be lobbying, when those manifesto commitments are still up in the air. So I think, if you want to take the kind of positive point of view, this is the time to be writing letters to your MP and kind of complaining to them and sort of saying, did you know about this? And oh, really? So maybe there is something there, and of course, like trying to gain traction and have some sort of story which kind of reaches a wider audience. So it's very clear that nothing will happen as long as the Tories are in power. Maybe even they will raise the limit further and make it even worse of a problem. So yeah, a Labour victory might help. Or the other one for me would be if Scotland gained independence. Because I'm a Scot, and so maybe I would be able to get in that way, and they wouldn't be such idiots about it. So yeah, I'm either kind of hoping this way that either Labour get in or Scotland's independent, and they don't get tyrannized by Tory kind of policies in Scotland, so they can kind of make their own mind up. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't kind of choose this. So that's the kind of the political kind of deadlock we're in. For myself, there's one sort of side which is how to respond to it artistically, and the other is how to respond to it on a practical level. On a practical level, basically, is what I've been doing, which is finding a way to make myself more marketable. So I'm when I left, I was a kind of notorious performance artist and writer of experimental theatre and conceptual dance and all this kind of like nice and kind of good stuff, but which isn't particularly well rewarded. And when I came to China, I ended up having to get a job to get a visa. So I've worked my way up through that kind of system, and I've managed to kind of put behind me the Chinese state universities, and now kind of have a independent university which is set up by Hong Kong Baptists. So it's a kind of international university which gives me a much better status in terms of the ability to find another job in the future, should I wish to, outside of China. Because one thing which is kind of interesting, which I have observed, because there was a time last year when COVID in China was getting kind of oppressive, and we were all just basically looking for a way out. And I was applying for jobs in the UK, and I noticed when I was going through interviews that anybody kind of who has a Chinese university on their CV is somehow tarnished. And it looks like a kind of blot, a stain on your CV from the point of view of employers here. So I realized there was some sort of level of racism which Chinese students and people coming from China must experience, which I was also a recipient of. And so I realized that if I want to be able to somehow either return to the UK or go somewhere else, I have to get out of the Chinese state system. So that's what I've now done, like kind of one level out of it at least. And maybe we'll end up in who knows where, New Zealand if we're lucky, or back in Britain. The future is unwritten, basically. Artistically, I did make a few works which kind of touched on the subject, and when I was making work in the UK, I did get a residency, I think it was 2016. And that was in Allen Heads in Northumberland, and it's a tiny little village at the end of the valley, kind of remote place, and a place you would think is kind of far away from the kind of cosmopolitan cities. And I guess it is. But what I wanted to do was, in this kind of small village, which has a very good contemporary arts residency centre, make a kind of performance which gave testimony to how connected this isolated British village in the North Pennines was to the rest of the world. So I kind of looked for all the stories of migration, all the stories of business, of ecology, which one way or another brought people to and from this city, this village rather, and it was really interesting, fascinating to really get underneath that and to realize that even in a little place like that, there was a lot of migration for quite a long period of time going on. Miners from Italy, for example, were working in lead mines there. And there's been a lot of history of people coming, and this is true across most of the UK, that it's not as much of an island as people rather think it is. So I kind of made that as a way to kind of make my statement, but also part of that statement was also revealing the story of my own exile through a result of tracing this interconnection and finally how I am kind of placed outside of it. I don't think it's necessary to always labor on about yourself. It gets a bit boring. It's more interesting sometimes to kind of focus on bigger issues and bigger people. But this is one where I realized that I am inside of something which is quite a lot bigger than me. And in some ways, I've finally landed in a relatively luxurious position. But there's an awful lot of people who are in worse positions than me, and families which are separated as a result of these policies.
And when you talk about your own art, that also ties in, very nicely with the next question, which is what do you think the arts can do about these issues, the arts and artists? And this is a question for both of you.
We've had members through the time do photographic exhibitions that have won awards. We have had academics, one of which is personally impacted. Together, they, her with another academic, have done a film which has gone to festivals in other countries and won some awards. We've had a member make a lovely quilt based on people's past, which people affected wrote something that was a powerful message of their own on a piece of fabric, which she then made into a quilt. We as an organisation wrote with Bristol University a character art book, which was about people's personal experiences, and that in itself was created through trauma workshops, in person and online. Films have been made about it in the past. Short documentaries have been made about it. And we've been contacted in the past by a theatre company that wanted the female lead. It was a one female artist who was exploring themes, and this was one particular area that she was interested in. It didn't follow through, unfortunately. There was, it went somewhere, another focus elsewhere. But there's lots of things that art can bring to this issue, can work with this issue. There's so much human experience and political angles. There's so much in it that could be used as inspiration for some amazing art. really powerful art. So.
My feeling is that I guess my medium is performance, video, this kind of area, and of course there is there's ways to turn it, but the issue is in some ways often not one which has a dramatic moment of. It's a kind of slow burn process of kind of wearing people down, slowly pushing them out through a procedure, which is, bit by bit by bit by bit. So it's not so much dramatic as kind of tedious, rude, annoying, racist, and blunt in that way. So it doesn't lend itself so kind of obviously to having this kind of moment which you can kind of pin your finger on and define it. So maybe for that reason, I've tended not to kind of work directly, but probably, we're creative. If you really kind of put your mind to it, you can find a way to tell that story. There's nothing which is impossible in that way. There is one way in which, though, I kind of wonder about this, because I was in some ways lucky enough to be kind of at the tail end of the kind of working class generation who managed to get education without having high school fees. And so I could go to university without having a rich family and without having a kind of huge amount of debt kind of saddled upon me. If I were, even 5 years later, I probably would not have studied arts. My family would have, said, "What the hell do you want to study fine art and theatre? Get a real job." And I think what this means is, like I said, this issue is one which structurally affects working class people far more than people with money. Although artists are often people without so much money, so maybe it does kind of find its way of kind of affecting this too. But one way or another, I do feel what has happened in the UK is the arts has become, to some degree, more of a middle class game again. And if you look at who studies arts, who practices it, it's more people from middle class backgrounds than it was previously. Or else you're saddled with such debt that you can't really sustain a career in the arts and you have to find another type of job. So I do wonder if the kind of voices who are personally affected by the story are people who are not in the arts to the same degree as it might have been if this kind of nonsense were kind of forced upon us 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier, in which case it would have affected more people like me. Maybe that's just I'm mixing topics, but there is some part of me which kind of wonders that this is really much more an economic issue, which is kind of slapped a whole kind of segment of the society. But it reaches kind of far, reaches wide, and I don't doubt that art is one important way to kind of raise awareness, consciousness of the issue. I guess I just, in my own work, I tend not to focus on issues specifically, but the issues which are around that find their way in all the same and inform the work. So it's tricky. I kind of tend not to want to be, kind of making a rallying cry that this is the thing which is an outrage and it has to be stopped now immediately. But that's just, the type of art which I choose to make. I totally respect people who also want to kind of draw attention to this because, hell, it must be seen more.
And I think as well, like there's so much power in the human story and people resonating with what it is you're producing. So for example, for me, it's about love, and it's about family, and it's about what happens when that is taken from you. And it's that having people, so COVID was the one time where all of a sudden there was more of a shared experience of what it was like to be isolated from your loved ones, to have to communicate via Skype. Like that was a moment in time for us as an issue where we're like, wow, people might actually get it a bit more now when we start to talk about children not knowing that dad's got legs because they never seen them. And, you know, things that those comments that children will make. And there's power in children's stories, children's take on things. You know, it's finding that narrative, finding that focus that will grab attention in a way that is heartfelt, that you are so like, you know, so that, but I guess that's, I work in factual TV, I work in, you know, where the human interest story is powerful, it's important. But that's the minute you start talking about politics and immigration, it can become very dry. So it's about connecting with the human and the human experience that's the most important thing, I think. I just wanted to flag as well, if you don't mind, Tamsin has to go imminently, and I just wanted to see if there was a question that she was asking Ambrose. Would it be possible for you to just...
Yeah. Would you like to speak to your question, Tamsin?
Yeah, thanks. Hi. It would just be great to know who Civic Leicester is and why you've organised this event, what you're interested in this issue.
Okay, so Civic Leicester started, I don't remember how many years ago. And how we started was because it started in Leicester, where we noticed that there is a lot of activity and conversation taking place at community level that tends not to get any media coverage at all. And this was happening like year in, year out, where people would meet, they would do things together, they would have conversations, and then they would disperse, and then they would meet again and have more conversations, and they would disperse. But there were very few people who were documenting or archiving or collecting those conversations. That's how Civic Leicester started. And we used video and photography to do it. And then over time, we migrated to social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and also Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And then from there, we moved to include print technologies. And we've been publishing poetry anthologies since 2015, 2016. So we've got a series of poetry anthologies where we encourage people to respond to specific themes. Most of the work is community-centered because Leicester is also the first plural city in Britain. It's also got a lot in it around migration. And I'm also interested in issues around forced migration because I'm a PhD researcher looking at refugee artists. But I'm aware that refugee artists are part of a bigger issue around forced displacement, whether it's internal displacement or displacement that leads to people leaving the country of origin, crossing borders, moving to other countries. So that's where.
Such amazing work. It's so great to learn of your organisation. I'm going to follow you on Twitter and everything now. And so thank you. And thanks so much for organising this evening. I'm sorry to have to leave, but it's been really, really great to meet you all and to hear from Bill and from you, Ambrose.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where this video will go.
Cool, brilliant. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
How about you, Louise? Do you have a question?
Yeah, several actually.
Okay.
I think part of the issue, as you said, is that a lot of people won't know about this at all. I mean, I know a bit more about forced migration, but I think a lot of people would assume you get married, and particularly if you have children, you get a passport and you can come over. And I suspect that's why there isn't an outcry about it. And am I right in saying that even if your spouse earned a fortune, it doesn't make any difference? It's on the... So does that affect British women more then? Because quite often British women, particularly if they've got children, are going to earn less than a man. So it would presumably affect women more.
It does. The stats show as well. There's been more recent Migration Observatory have done some stats, and it affects women more, and also young people who are couples starting out, retired couples as well, and obviously people on low income earners as well. And if we spoke to Migration Observatory about doing some work on if they were to raise the minimum income requirement, which was threatened on Boxing Day of all days. It came out in the Times, ruined my Christmas. And it's all still very much a threat. But if they were to do it in line with inflation, we're looking, and men obviously would be affected more as well by that point. But again, women, the percentage of women being impacted and young couples went up quite a lot. But to raise something that is already having a huge amount of damage. I mean, I say that with rolling my eyes because it's the government and they don't care. Ultimately, it's just anything they can be doing to just chip away at those silly little numbers they like to play with. And the thing is, so with the women, they are it's enforced single parenting. They then have to find, they're trying to work the jobs to be able to keep that minimum income requirement or get as close to it as possible. There's always that pressure. They're away from their children who've already lost a parent because they're not in the country. And so and then a grandparent might have to step out of retirement to hold the fort for a bit. But either way, the pressures on the mother, because the non-British partner income doesn't matter until they're in the UK, then they've left their country. So whatever job they were doing, they have to get a job here. But none of that, and that's one of the things that we've been asking for and pushing for, is that that income and potential income is included. But at the moment, they're going through a simplification of the rules because you have to get legal advice to do the application. Some will do it alone, but it's not recommended to do the application form because it's just fraught with ambiguous questions. And the consequences are too high. So, you've got, but so they're simplifying them, but Ukraine war pushed that back naturally, pushed a lot of stuff back in terms of suddenly then the 6-month minimum would be or the 6-month standard would be the time, whereas it would be like 8 weeks possibly if it was a clear-cut application. In 3 months you could be together in the UK. Any difficulties, well, it is a lot longer. And then Ukraine meant that it would be 6 months standard So we were all shunted, families were shunted to the back of the queue. And you know, there is reason for that, but there was, rather than bringing extra workers in to work and keep the marriage and families team going, it wasn't. It was like, oh, we'll just keep them, they can just wait a bit longer. And so you then sort of had all those impacts that were coming in. But, and of course, all that time, you've got these women who are struggling to keep a job down, keep their own sanity going. And the children, the impact on the children because of that is immense. I mean, the impacts that we're sort of hearing from families on the children themselves is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And within that, it's trying to reassure the parents that this is not your fault. Do not, you know, because there will be guilt that I am contributing to my child having this experience. This is, you know, why me and my partner doing this, or, you know, whereas it is being done to them. And it's hard conversations to have when you're asking about the impacts on the children, because you do not want for 1 minute for it to feel like that is on them, why that is happening, because it is not. It is absolutely not. And understanding from the children how it's impacting them. You know, it's very difficult. I mean, it would be heartbreaking. I mean, I did a little video called "Why Did You Leave Me?" It's one of my first little videos, and I wrote a poem, and then I got a little child who was who was known. Mum was very active as a member, and she was saying, yeah, I'll ask her. She was about 8 years old, and so she read the poem. And we did lots of sort of home videos attached to it. And then some children did little videos saying just simply, you know, I've not seen my dad for X amount of months or, you know, years, and I miss. And even just a simple statement like that is jaw-dropping, because you're like, it's packed with so much stuff. There's so much layers there to unpack. And it's frustrating. It's constantly frustrating. How is this not getting traction that it deserves? But exactly that, Louise.
I think people don't know.
Yeah.
And what do you know? Because I was looking at some migration figures, because as always, it's the vulnerable communities that are scapegoated, and particularly like asylum seekers. And for migration, it's actually a very small percentage are made up of asylum seekers. And do you know what sort of numbers are affected by this?
We don't know. It's very hard to tell. We had Migration Observatory a few years ago. We asked them, and the reality is they're not in the system because they don't meet the minimum income requirement. It's very hard to ascertain. But they said they tried their best to come up with different scenarios, and one of them was that it could possibly be, this is pre-Brexit, possibly be up to 60,000 affected. At one point, as part of the Supreme Court ruling, Supreme Court case in 2015, there was a report done called the Family Friendly Report, and it cited 15,000 children were affected. How that number is now, we just don't know. And with Brexit, I'd love to know what those numbers could develop into, but that's a lot of work to be done in calculating, you know, how many people are in all the different countries. Because I've asked the question thinking, oh, this should be easy, surely. No, it's not. But we do know how many Brits are living in Europe, but how many of them are married and how many have children. That's a whole other project that would be great done. Just needs some funding behind it. But
listening to what Caroline you had to say there, it makes me really glad that I did not end up with this kind of separated family situation, and that I just accept the situation that it is better to live outside of the UK, to be exiled as a result of this, than to still try to find a way to kind of get into the UK. It's very interesting. It's even to the point now that to get into the UK, I would end up in a worse situation, to do a comparable job. So I can't honestly say how I would, what circumstances would get me back into the country. And in terms of the statistics, I don't see how it's really possible to measure the people who have left the country and ended up thinking, I don't want to return because of this. We're invisible statistics. There's no very kind of clear way that you can measure people who decide that it's too much trouble to get back into the country.
Yeah.
Maybe we come to, we try and is there, in all that we've said, is there anything that you'd like to emphasize or add?
I think that for me, that there is a real need for positive representation, that in art, there really needs to be the contributions based, the human benefits, the human story, the love, the love across borders. Even in all of this horrendousness that families go through, they stick together. They are going to beat the Home Office because their love matters, their family matters, and they will do whatever it takes to try and get here. That is, and I don't mean that to sound sort of like romanticized, because it's not romanticizing it, but it's just getting those glimpses of, the power of human love and just how far people will push themselves for it, for how much they love somebody, and also the sacrifice that is made in this process, where people are having to make those really heartbreaking decisions about whether they continue their relationship, whether they continue being a united family, albeit separated, because it's just too difficult. But the power of that sacrifice, the power of that in of itself is huge. It's extremely sad, but that somebody would put themselves through that to do the best for their children or to stop the pain for their family is huge, and wrong on so many levels that they would have to do that. Of course, it goes without saying. There's so much to be said here in terms of our values and the importance of family, and the importance of having that choice to have a family, to love who you want to love and to be with who you want to be, and for your children and their identity and them understanding who they are. And if it's a cross-border family, the power of that identity of who they are, and what happens when they don't have that one person who's such a vital part of their identity is not there. There's so much. My God, it's so layered. It's incredible. Yeah.
From my point of view, I think there's kind of two kind of short term what needs to happen and a long term. In the short term is to kind of get the Tories out. Nothing will happen until the Tories are gone. In the longer term, it's to kind of change the discourse about migration, and so that there's not this idea that migrants are a bad thing, that they are somehow a a drain on the country, but rather to kind of change this kind of thinking and get people to realize the significant contributions which migrants make, and also to see that people like me who migrate to other countries are also migrants in other places. I think we need to kind of get rid of this term expat. I don't like it because basically everybody's migrating to other countries for one reason or another. Mine is forced, some people it's by choice, but you know, we're all migrants one way or another. And maybe part of that, what's underpinning this is still this kind of British love affair with its empire, and inability to kind of get over the fact that it's not the country it was, and stop this kind of nostalgia trip and get a more clean, cold look at where the country actually is, that it is just another European medium high income, relatively small country. And once they kind of get over it and see it in this way, I think there's maybe some hope to kind of make realistic assessment of where the country goes next, and to not have this sort of poisoned relationship with the rest of the world, which is something I feel is particularly endemic with the way kind of Tories kind of, but you know, I'm not only going to single out them. I think it's a kind of much more endemic issue, which you know, goes elsewhere. But yeah, the short term, but there's also a kind of long term kind of process which needs to happen.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's that decades and decades of narrative that is beating against immigrants coming into this country, and the fact that there's this loss of memory of how we've gone into other countries, and we have that, you know, that colonialism, and all of that seems to have been completely, none of that matters, doesn't exist. And so when you switch that around, all of a sudden it's, oh no, don't want people coming here. Ooh. And it's it's unbelievable. It's believable but unbelievable at the same time. But...
And then maybe we end on a on this. What are your hopes around this issue?
We actually, the incoming party, actually recognise how wrong these policies have been and rectify that, but also recognise all of the benefits that people are bringing when they come to this country, and integration, and the wealth of experience, knowledge, just culture, everything that comes with binational families, different cultures, and being part of changing the narrative to something far more positive, and getting rid of the minimum income requirement, of course. That's saying.
Taking a slightly more pessimistic view that Scotland gets independence, because the Tories will still be the Tories. And if Scotland gets independence, then I'm back in the shop, because, you know, at least my son can then get an education similar to the one I did, which is to say a decent education in a university without being saddled in debt. I'd like to, him to get that. So, but you know, these things take a while, so we'll see. But yeah, the Tories out would be a great start.
So on that note, I say thank you very much. And so the next conversation in the Forced Migration in the Arts series will be taking place next month. We are in July. Let me just check the date. It will be on the 27th of July, and it will be again in the evening, where we will invite another maybe pair of speakers or 3 speakers to also talk on an aspect around of the arts and its connection with forced migration. So without more from me, thank you very much, and thank you, Bill, and also thank you, Caroline and Louise and Tamsin for joining us and taking part in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Thank
putting it
you.
on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.